Hey guys, Rob here with 3D Printscape. Today I'm going to show you how to fix the probing error that you might get on your Taz 3D printers. I'm using my Taz 6 here as an example, but it would apply to pretty much the entire lineup that has the same framed assembly. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of show you the error, which you can see here. I'm going to talk about a couple things that can cause it, and then talk about what I did to fix it the first time I had it. This is one of those errors that was extremely annoying because when I first started using it, after about 2 months in, I just randomly started getting it. Then it took longer and longer to get my prints to start. Like sometimes I would have to try it 4 or 5 times in order to actually get the print to start. And at that point, I wasn't sure exactly what was causing it. I took a look at the instruction manual and they had a couple recommendations, which is kind of what I used for the foundation here. But I did make a couple tweaks based on what I saw work better. Alright, so that's a long enough introduction. Let's go ahead and jump in. Before we do, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks. Alright guys, let's start off by talking about the 3 things that I've actually had cause the probing failure errors. The first one is somewhat common, but it's an easy fix, and that is the scratch pad. If this gets too worn, you could potentially have issues where you're not getting the filament off of the nozzle, and basically what ends up happening is you still have filament on the bottom of the nozzle when you're trying to actually do the probing. If it does get through the probing successfully, you're going to have an issue with potentially your first layer because you're going to have an additional gap to account for the filament that was there. In a lot of cases, I've had it to a point where it caused enough of an offset that it actually failed the probe. So there's a couple fixes here. First one is you can kind of scratch this out a little bit to kind of push the extra padding in just so it's hit by the nozzle. That's one easy fix if you don't want to try to mess with things, but these do wear out, so that's only going to work for so long. The second one is you can go ahead and take these 2 screws out, pop this up, and then reverse the scratch pad. That's basically going to act like a new pad. You can do that a couple times, go back and forth on each side. It will get to the point where it's completely worn out though, but you're probably talking, many months of usage before you get to that point. And then lastly, after you've tried both of those, if you're still having issues, you might have to replace the pad. You can get them from the manufacturer, and I'll link to them in the description below. They're not that expensive. I think they come in packs of 3 if I'm not mistaken, and it was somewhere between $5 and $10. But it's just one of those things that are required for this printer. Alright, so second thing is the frame not being squared. So this is more of an issue if you're moving it around a lot or you're just setting it up for the first time. I know some of the original models didn't have some of the extra bracing around the top and bottom here, but this one does, and some of the new ones have a little bit more. But if these aren't square, you're going to have issues with leveling, and it's going to be a complete nightmare. So if you're just setting it up or you're starting to get random probing errors, what I would do is get a square level and then just go through and make sure all of these are square. If one of them's not square, you're going to want to loosen up the bolts and then re-square it, and then go through and make sure that it didn't mess with the alignment of other ones. That process will take about 10 minutes. I don't think it's worth actually walking through and showing you because it's literally just going to be putting a square in each corner and making sure that it's aligned. The process isn't hard. If you do want me to walk through that, go ahead and leave a comment below and I can do a video on it. But I was hoping that talking about it would be enough to cover it. But if you guys want a video, I've got no problem doing one. Alright, so the last thing, which is what got me hung up, but if one side is higher than the other one by more than a couple centimeters, you're going to randomly start seeing probing issues. You'll notice it more when it starts to come down, and if it's hitting one of them, then it jumps over to the next one, and then it doesn't. That's going to be your problem. What the documentation says to do is go pretty much raise it to a certain point, and then measure from the the x-axis up to the top of the frame. I did that, and it didn't help me in this case. I'm not sure if the bottom was slightly off or if the stand it was setting on was causing some sort of tilt, but it was actually level based on the top of the frame, but not based on the bed, which is what actually mattered. There's a lot of documentation and forums of people talking about here's saying like here's the documentation, or make sure you level off at the top. But I mean, after going through all of that, it did me no good. So I ended up just testing the bottom, and that ended up being the issue. So let's walk through what it takes to actually fix that. So I'm going to power this on, raise the axis a little bit, and then put the extruder in the center so that we can get height measurements. Now you're going to need either a ruler or a pair of calipers. I've got a pair of calipers that I've used before. So I'm just going to use these just because it's easier, but a standard flat ruler or a metal ruler or something like that will work just fine. All right, so let's go ahead and turn this on. All right, so I'm just going to go to movement. All right, so we want to go to move the x-axis here first. So we'll go into that. We'll move it 10 to start with. You want to try to center it here, just so it's not in the way. So we'll just set 70, 120. About 130 looks pretty good. So then we'll leave that. Now we want to raise the z-axis. So we'll go to move z, and then I tend to just do 1 millimeter increments here so I don't cause it to hit the bed. Alright, so I just moved it up 10. Basically, I wanted enough of a gap here so I can measure the two. Now, in this scenario, I purposely offset the one side to kind of reproduce the issue I was seeing before. So this might be a little bit more dramatic than you would see, but if it's more than a couple centimeters off, you will have an issue. Alright, so I'm going to jump over to the other side here and then kind of talk about what we got to do. Alright guys, so either with your ruler or your calipers, we're going to want to measure the height from the bottom of this bar to the build surface, and then same on this side. These should be fairly close. Like I mentioned a minute ago, they will be off because I purposely set it off on this. But we want to measure it, and then I'll show you how to make the adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and use these, turn them on really quick. Alright, so in this case, we're at 1.91 inches. Now if we go over to the other side, here you can see that there's definitely a gap here. So what we're going to do is we're going to, underneath this frame here, there's going to be a wheel. We can turn it to adjust the height. So we're just going to turn this a couple times. I'm going to turn the printer back off here so that we don't mess with the stepper motors. Alright. So then I'm just lowering this here. I'm turning it counterclockwise right now to lower it. And then I want to get to a point where it just sits right on it. And then I'm going to check the other side. Now we're still a little bit lower on this side because we lowered the one side, so it kind of angled it off a little bit. So just go and lower this a little bit more. Alright, so right now we're at 1.84 inches, so we'll lower this a little bit more again. Alright, that's pretty good on that side. Now it's probably going to be off a little bit here again. So we have a couple choices. We can continue doing what we were just doing, or try to raise this side a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so that's sitting pretty good there. And we're sitting a tad high, not much. Alright, that's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these back off so I don't kill the battery. So these don't have to be perfectly even. If you're off by a little bit, like a couple millimeters, or I would say maybe a 1/16 of an inch, you're probably going to be fine. If it's off much more than that, you are going to have issues. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the printer back on and go ahead and try to kick off a print and make sure it walks through the leveling process successfully. So I'm just going to go down to print from SD and just print whatever I had in there. And while this is heating up, I'm going to pause the video, then I'll start it back up when it starts the leveling. Alright, here it's starting the probing process. It's getting the first measurement, and then it's going to go through the wiping process. If you guys haven't seen it be done before, so if you don't have a Taz, it is kind of neat just to watch it go through the self-leveling process. Though it is annoying when it doesn't work. Alright, so now if you're going to have an issue, typically it's here if it's not straight. If you get to a point where it's coming down and not touching the metal, that's when you're going to see the behavior that I was talking about before. It might get close sometimes, it might not, but it looks like it was good there. Alright, so that should have been it. It's going to continue to heat up and then start the print, so let's make sure it doesn't have any issues. Alright, there you go guys. Now it was good. I'm going to go ahead and power this back off. Thanks. If you guys have any questions about the process, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks. Alright guys, that covers a handful of things that might cause the probing error. If you've come across anything else that is causing it, go ahead and leave a comment below. I'll be curious to see, and then if it ends up being more of an issue, I'll do another video on that in the future. But based on my experience, that's pretty much been the 3 things that were causing it. Alright, so if you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment below. Thanks.